Welcome to the seventh day of Lent. If you missed last week, Lent is a season of the church calendar in which we create space to encounter God. We do this by giving up or taking up, giving up what can distract us to create space for us to hear from and respond to God. We take up practices that ground us and realign us and increase our attention to God's voice. So every year, our prayer is that together as a community from Ash Wednesday to Easter Sunday, we'll be more intentional in creating space and encountering the ground of all being and the source of life, God our Father. And this year, we specifically wanted to engage in Lent through the lens of finding rest for our souls, based off of these verses from Matthew 11, where Jesus says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." So we're looking at Lent through the lens of those verses and finding rest for our souls. And so we're going to spend the next several weeks, as Matt talked about, talking about things that prevent us from resting, as those are the things that also prevent us from connecting to God. And this week, we are talking about perfectionism. Perfectionism, if you want a definition for it, in psychology, is a broad personality trait characterized by a person's concern with striving for flawlessness and perfection, and is accompanied by critical self-evaluations and concerns regarding others' evaluations. Now, before this week, I would not call myself a perfectionist. Some of you who know me might laugh at that. But I never really feel like I am striving for flawlessness. I care a lot about things being done well. But it turns out fear of failure colors a lot of my behavior, which I've known for a long time, but I didn't realize that is a classic symptom of perfectionism, which is really interesting. I learned at a very young age that my performance was really, really important. How I showed up in the world was tied to my acceptance and approval. Based on how my parents addressed behavior and how they interacted with grades, and mostly, I think, honestly, how they talked about other people that weren't around. I learned from a very young age that how people performed was everything, and I began to tie my value to how well I performed or how well I met expectations of others. I learned to morph myself into whatever I thought others wanted. And it took a good bit of counseling and God's grace to help me break out of those cycles of shame and actually uncover who I am. I had spent so much of my life wearing a mask and changing that into whoever I thought people wanted me to be that it took a long time for me to actually figure out who I was. But still today, I deal with these patterns of thinking with perfectionism. It makes it really hard for me to ask for help sometimes because I feel like I'm the only one that can do it right, which is insane and not true, but I often feel that way. I notice it a lot now that my daughter's in school. When we do homework together, holy cow, it comes out very strong, which I've gotten a lot better at in the short 6 months that we've been doing homework, but it is a daily challenge for me to not fix things for her or to tell her instantly when she gets something wrong, but she lets me know that that's not a great way for us to interact. I also see it in how I interact with rest and God, which we're going to get into in a bit. Are you a perfectionist? Are you someone that would self-identify as a perfectionist? Again, I wasn't, but I read a lot of things about it this week, and here is a list of characteristics or traits to help you maybe identify if this is something that maybe you struggle with. The first is that you place unrealistic demands on yourself and or others. This one's always been tricky for me because usually it's yourself and others, and I do this weird thing where I don't place really high demands on other people, but I do on myself, which is probably just more pride than anything else. A second is that you procrastinate or avoid tasks because you feel failure. You fear failure. This one surprised me a lot. I, for I don't know, maybe since COVID, have really struggled with writing talks on time. And so it's like tonight, I finished at 5 p.m. I hate living this way. I hate it every Tuesday. I cannot get myself to write any sooner. And I realized this week that it's because if I wait until the last minute, I don't have to evaluate it. It's just like, it is what it is because there's no time. Because I'm so consumed with this fear of failure, it's easier to just procrastinate and paint myself into a corner. Another symptom is that you believe you must earn God's love and acceptance, and I would extend that to others' love and acceptance. 4, you struggle with self-condemnation and feeling like you are not good enough. 5, you criticize yourself and or others with you should statements. Sometimes people call this shoulding on yourself or shoulding on others. If you want to take that and use it, that's fine. If you don't, that's fine too. 6, you tend to overwork and neglect rest in your pursuit of excellence. And 7, you seek approval for doing something well. I think these traits usually stem from a really good place. I think wanting to do things well and with excellence and having attention to detail is not a bad thing by any means. But when our sense of identity becomes rooted in our performance, it starts to negatively affect everything. And so if this is something that's anywhere on your radar in how you live, I hope what you hear tonight is that your worth and your value is not based on what you do or produce or achieve. To explore this further, we're going to look at this short, tiny little, but famous story about Jesus and these two sisters that we find in Luke that goes like this. This is from Luke 10. As Jesus and his disciples were on their way, he came to a village where a woman named Martha opened her home to him. She had a sister called Mary. If you remember a few weeks ago, we talked about Lazarus. This is the same Martha and Mary. They are his sisters. She had a sister called Mary who sat at the Lord's feet listening to what he said. But Martha was distracted by all the preparations that had to be made. She came to him and said, "Lord, why don't you care that my sister has left me to do all the work by myself? Tell her to help me." "Martha, Martha," the Lord answered, "you are worried and upset about many things, but few things are needed, or indeed only one. Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken away from her." That's it. That's the whole story. And there are actually just, I don't know how many sentences this is, 5 or 6. There's tons of layers to what's going on here, and we're not going to get into all of them. But essentially, Martha and Mary come from a well-off family, and they're opening their home to Jesus for the very first time. And you can see there are polar opposite personalities in play here. Mary is all about being with Jesus and learning from him. Martha is all about wanting to care for Jesus and his disciples by taking care of everything, by preparing a meal, by preparing their house, by getting everything perfect for them. It's two different approaches, and both are good. I mean, Jesus even says Mary has chosen what is better, not necessarily you chose wrong, but Mary chose the good thing, the better thing, in being with Jesus rather than trying to do things for him. And I think we have to read Martha's mind a little bit here, but as a perfectionist, putting myself in this frame of thought, I think we can see that Martha is worried about what happens if things aren't prepared well. What does it say about her household or her family? What does it say about her if she doesn't have everything just right for Jesus? And she's feeling very overwhelmed by that and is like, I'm the only one doing anything, so it's not going to get done. And then Jesus is going to be all sad about the way our home is or the way the meal is. She's all bent out of shape about all the work that needs to be done and scared about how it not being done reflects on her. And she thinks if it's all done perfectly for Jesus, then she'll look good. I think that's the root thing going on here. If I do all this the right way, it will reflect well on me and I will look good, or my family will look good. Because the truth is, perfectionism is just manipulation at the end of the day. Perfectionism is a way of manipulating others into giving us approval in the hopes that other people's approval will convince us that we are worthy. but it, it never works because we know how flawed we are. So no matter how perfect we get our performances or how well we craft our masks to be exactly what we think people want, we know the truth at the end of the day. And another part of this that comes along with being a perfectionist is that we don't really trust what other people say because we think we know better. So even when we do get the approval that we're after, we don't believe it, which is a vicious cycle to get caught in, to be constantly looking for approval but never trusting it when you get it. Now, I'm overstating a bit how this still affects my life. I've done a ton of work, and I can honestly say, like, I do accept compliments, but that took a lot of work and honestly came down to me just having to put aside the idea that I know more than other people and trusting that if someone is saying something nice to me, it means that they know something I don't. But still, that is a vicious cycle to get caught in. And I think it directly ties into how we interact with God. I think often if we're caught in perfectionism, we will avoid God because there's nothing to gain or achieve with him. And so there's no motivation in that relationship. That's kind of one branch. Sometimes we also make it something to gain and achieve, more often than not, and strive to grow closer to God. And it becomes this sense of duty and this checklist thing that we go through and we burn ourselves out on it. Or we avoid God because if we do that long enough, we know that we'll never be perfect at it. We know we'll fail, and we feel like God is just standing over our shoulder waiting for us to mess up, and that will just add to the evidence of what we already know to be true, that we're failures. None of this is ever going to change unless we begin to trust. Trust that our sense of worth does not derive from our performance. To begin to trust that what God says about us is true. Paul alludes to this idea in the letter to the Galatians in chapter 3. He writes this, "Let me put this question to you. How did your new life begin? Was it by working your heads off to please God? Or was it by responding to God's message to you? Are you going to continue this craziness? For only crazy people would think that they could complete by their own efforts what was begun by God. If you weren't smart enough or strong enough to begin it, how do you suppose you could perfect it? Did you go through this whole painful learning process for nothing? It's not yet a total loss, but it certainly will be if you keep this up. Answer this question. Does the God who lavishly provides you with his own presence, his Holy Spirit, working things in your lives you could never do for yourselves, does he do these things because of your strenuous moral striving or because you trust him to do them in you?" Skipping down a bit further, Paul writes, "The obvious impossibility of carrying out such a moral program should make it plain that no one can sustain a relationship with God through strenuous moral striving. The person who lives in right relationship with God does it by embracing what God arranges for them. Doing things for God is the opposite of entering into what God does for you." Habakkuk, who was an Old Testament prophet, who Paul's about to quote, Habakkuk had it right. The person who believes God is set right by God, and that's the real life. Rule keeping does not naturally evolve into living by faith, but only perpetuates itself in more and more rule keeping. So what is Paul saying here? In essence, he's saying there is no such thing at winning when it comes to a relationship with God. There is no such thing as perfecting a relationship with God. There is no such thing as earning or striving a relationship with God. There's no such thing as winning when it comes to faith. You have already won. That's kind of the point. You have nothing to prove. Stop making yourself miserable trying to earn God's love. Stop making yourself miserable by believing that how you perform, what you do, or what you produce, or what you achieve is your value. We can find rest for our souls from perfectionism and connection to God when we're willing to trust that our worth and our value are not rooted in what we do or produce or achieve, but in who God says we are, imperfect and beloved daughters and sons. So I said our focus this Lent is going to be on rest and how these things interfere with rest, because that's also how they interfere with our connection to God. So how does perfectionism do that? How does perfectionism get in the way of us resting? Again, it's very similar to how it affects our relationship with God. We will avoid it because doing nothing, resting, achieves nothing. It feels like it achieves nothing. So what's the point? Or again, we'll avoid rest because we make it into another rule, another thing to achieve and strive for, and it quickly becomes work and not rest. Defeats the purpose. Or we'll avoid it because we think we won't do it right. There's a right way to rest, and we're not going to get it. We'll fail, proving that we just are not good at this whole thing, or proving what we already fear to be true, that we think God already knows, that we're just messed up. So if this is something that you struggle with, or even kind of struggle with, this week, let's focus on ways that we can give up perfectionism. And I came up with a handful of them that I'll share with you, but I would love if you come up with other ways to know what those are throughout the week. The first one that I came up with that I'm already trying to do more, and I'm committed to doing more this week, is let someone help you with something or do it for you and allow mistakes to happen. This is a really easy and effective thing to do if you have kids. My son loves doing whatever it is that I'm doing, and he's 3, so he's not good at it, right? Because he's 3, and that's fine. I'm going to try this week to invite him to do things with me or for me and just let them be whatever they are. I've already this week, I haven't even told Michaela this, I was sharing during staff meeting, I'm trying to let my kids, when they make messes, they get to clean it up, which you'd think would be that's cool, I don't have to do anything, but I want it to be cleaned up the right way. And I'm trying to let go of that and just let them clean it up. And if it's really that bad, I can go back and do it later. The second thing is intentionally do something you're not good at. I hate this. I'm mad that I thought of it. I almost didn't share it. But I'm going to try to find a way to lean into this. And the first thing I could think of, I'm not sure I'm going to stick with this, but I am terrible at drawing, so bad. So I might just try drawing something every day. I'm probably not going to show anyone. I'm definitely not showing my artist wife. But it's something I might do. Another thing, replace I should with I could in your thoughts to yourself. If you're able to catch yourself, excuse me, if you're able to catch yourself thinking, I should have done this, or I should have done that, or I should be doing this, just change that to could and take a deep breath. Another thing is work your way up to doing nothing for an hour a day. I know that this is difficult to do at first, so start small. Start with 10 minutes of just doing nothing. Nothing at all. And work your way up there to just an hour of not being productive. And then when you catch yourself beating yourself up throughout the week, which is going to happen, I want you to try to stop and think, I am not loved because of my performance. This is something that when I was going through counseling the first time, my therapist would have me just repeat to myself, and I would catch myself just beating the crap out of myself. I am not loved because of my performance. And sometimes we still get in that spiral of just tearing ourselves down, and it's helpful to just call someone. It feels silly, but just call someone and tell them what was going on. You'll feel kind of silly doing it, and why was I beating myself up for that? But they can help reassure you that yeah, that's silly, you're fine. Everything's good. And it's a way to hold yourself accountable to changing the way you think. Or you can journal about it, write about it, pray about it. The biggest thing is retraining yourself not to beat yourself up when you fail in any of these things that you try this week. Or with what we're doing in general, with Lent in general. I've said this before, I'll say it again. There's no winning at this. There's no right way to do this. This is not something to achieve. This is not something to perfect. This is something to lean into, to find rest, and to find a deeper connection to God. So to recap, perfectionism is just a way of manipulating others into giving us approval. Because we hope that if we can convince other people that we're good enough, maybe that will convince us that we're good enough. But it never works. It just leaves us isolated from others, including God. We can find rest for our souls from perfectionism and connection to God when we're willing to trust that our value and our worth is not rooted in what we do or produce or achieve, but in who God says we are, imperfect and beloved daughters and sons. Would you pray with me? God, I confess my desire to not make mistakes. I confess my fear of failing, and I confess the ways that I've allowed my sense of self-worth to be tied to my performance. God, I pray for myself and for anyone else in the room that struggles with this, that you would help us, as painful as it may be this week, help us see the ways that this shows up in our lives so that we can begin to address it with you. God, thank you for these seasons in which we're invited to be intentional and maybe newly aware of things that we've let fall into our subconscious. God, I pray that you would meet us there and be with us this week. We love you, God.